The morning briefing room at Forward Operating Base Resolute buzzed with the low murmur of 37 combat veterans reviewing intelligence reports. Staff Sergeant Marcus Kelly stood at the door, clipboard in hand, checking names against his roster. When Captain Vera Nightingale Kozlov approached, he barely glanced up from his paperwork. "Ma'am, this is a classified operational briefing. You'll need to wait outside." Kozlov's steel-gray eyes didn't waver. She'd expected this. In her 14 years of military service, she'd grown accustomed to being the only woman in rooms full of men who assumed she'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. Her flight suit bore the same desert tan as every other pilot on base, her rank insignia polished to regulation standard. But Kelly saw only what he wanted to see. "I'm Captain Kozlov, 447th Fighter Squadron. My orders specify attendance at this briefing." Kelly's jaw tightened. He'd been running security for these meetings for 8 months, and he knew every pilot assigned to Resolute. This woman wasn't on his list. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside. This briefing is for combat pilots only." Behind them, the conversation in the briefing room had begun to quiet. Heads turned. Some pilots recognized Kozlov. They'd seen her around the base, always alone, always carrying herself with the particular brand of confidence that came from hours in the cockpit. Others had only heard whispers about the transfer pilot who'd arrived 3 weeks ago without fanfare, without the usual introductory meetings that accompanied new squadron assignments. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison Price, the base's operations commander, emerged from the front of the room. His weathered face bore the lines of a career spent in forward positions, and his eyes held the calculating look of someone who'd learned to read situations quickly. "What's the holdup, Sergeant?" Kelly straightened. "Sir, this officer claims to be assigned to the briefing, but she's not on my roster." Price's gaze shifted to Kozlov. He'd received the classified transfer orders 2 days ago, orders that came with minimal explanation and maximum security clearance. The Pentagon had been unusually tight-lipped about the details, mentioning only that Captain Kozlov would be available for special reconnaissance missions requiring unique skill sets. "Captain Kozlov," Price said, his voice carrying the weight of recognition. "You're cleared for this briefing. Sergeant Kelly, add her to your roster." As Kozlov entered the briefing room, 36 pairs of eyes followed her movement. She chose a seat in the back, her presence creating ripples of curiosity and skepticism among the assembled pilots. The room's atmosphere shifted subtly, the easy camaraderie of moments before replaced by the tension that always accompanied the unknown. Major Rebecca Santos, the intelligence officer, moved to the front of the room. The large screen behind her displayed a satellite image of mountainous terrain marked with red target indicators. "Gentlemen and lady," she added with a slight nod toward Kozlov, "what you're about to hear is classified at the highest levels." The satellite image zoomed in on a valley system deep in enemy territory. The terrain was brutal, jagged peaks reaching 12,000 feet, narrow passes that would challenge even the most skilled pilots, and weather patterns that shifted without warning. Hidden among the rocky outcroppings, thermal imaging had detected what appeared to be a significant military installation. "Intelligence suggests this facility is housing advanced surface-to-air missile systems," Santos continued. "Systems that could threaten our operations across the entire theater. The problem is location. It's positioned in a valley that's virtually impossible to approach with conventional aircraft." Murmurs rippled through the room. Every pilot present understood the implications. The valley's geography created a natural fortress, steep walls that would funnel attacking aircraft into predetermined kill zones, elevation changes that would challenge weapons systems, and weather conditions that could turn deadly in minutes. "Traditional bombing runs are out of the question," Santos said. "The approach vectors require flying below radar coverage, navigating through mountain passes barely wide enough for a single aircraft, and maintaining perfect precision in conditions that would challenge our best pilots on their finest days. Captain Jake Morrison, a 12-year veteran of the 447th, raised his hand. "Ma'am, what about guided munitions? We could strike from standoff distance." "Negative. The facility is hardened against conventional ordnance. We need precision strikes on specific targets within the compound. That means visual identification, close-range engagement, and immediate extraction before enemy air defenses can respond." The room fell silent. Every pilot was running calculations in their head: approach angles, fuel consumption, escape routes. The mission parameters were pushing the boundaries of what was possible, even for experienced combat pilots. Lieutenant Colonel Price stepped forward. "The Pentagon has identified this as a priority target. We need options for a surgical strike that eliminates the threat without collateral damage to surrounding civilian populations." As if on cue, the briefing room door opened. A young communications specialist entered, carrying a sealed envelope marked with the highest security classifications. He approached Price and whispered something that made the colonel's eyebrows rise slightly. Price opened the envelope, scanned its contents, and looked directly at Kozlov. "Captain, it appears your reputation has preceded you." The room's attention focused entirely on the woman in the back row. Kozlov remained motionless, her expression unchanged, but those who knew how to read combat veterans could see the subtle signs of recognition in her posture. She knew why she was here. "The Pentagon has specifically requested that Captain Kozlov review this mission profile," Price continued. "It seems her particular expertise may be relevant to our current situation." Staff Sergeant Kelly, still standing by the door, looked confused. He'd spent the morning trying to keep this woman out of the briefing, and now she was apparently the focal point of the entire operation. Morrison leaned forward in his seat. "Sir, what exactly is Captain Kozlov's background?" Price consulted the document again. "That information is classified. What I can tell you is that she's been cleared for this mission at the highest levels." The tension in the room was palpable. 36 combat pilots, each with their own impressive records and hard-earned credibility, were being told that a pilot they'd never heard of might be their best option for an impossible mission. Kozlov finally spoke, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd faced situations like this before. "Colonel, I'll need to review the detailed topographical data, weather patterns for the target area, and the specific mission parameters. But based on what I've heard so far, this mission falls within my area of expertise." Her words carried a quiet confidence that cut through the skepticism in the room. This wasn't boasting or false bravado. It was the matter-of-fact assessment of a professional evaluating a job within her capabilities. "And what area of expertise would that be, Captain?" Morrison asked, his tone respectful but pointed. Kozlov's eyes met his across the room. "Low-altitude precision strikes in extreme terrain, Major, flying in conditions where conventional tactics don't apply." The briefing room fell silent again. But this time, the silence carried a different quality, not skepticism, but the focused attention of professionals recognizing the voice of genuine expertise. Major Santos moved to the next slide, displaying detailed mission parameters. "The target facility must be neutralized within a 48-hour window. Weather conditions are deteriorating, and intelligence indicates the enemy is aware of our surveillance activities." Colonel Price nodded to Kozlov. "Captain, you have the floor. Tell us what you think." Kozlov stood, her movements precise and economical. She walked to the front of the room, studying the satellite imagery with the intensity of someone who'd spent countless hours reading terrain from the cockpit of a fighter aircraft. "The valley approach is definitely challenging," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "But not impossible. The key is understanding that this isn't a conventional bombing run. This is precision flying in an environment where every decision matters. She pointed to specific features on the satellite image. The thermal updrafts from these rock formations will create wind shear that could tear apart a conventional approach, but they also create opportunities for aircraft designed to exploit those conditions. Morrison studied the image more carefully. You're talking about flying below the radar horizon, using the terrain to mask approach vectors. Exactly. The enemy's air defense systems are designed to track aircraft following predictable flight paths. But if you're willing to fly in conditions that push the limits of both aircraft and pilot, you can exploit blind spots in their coverage. The room was completely focused now. Every pilot present understood the implications of what Kozlov was describing. She wasn't just talking about flying low. She was talking about flying in conditions that would challenge the structural limits of their aircraft. "What about extraction?" asked Captain Lisa Chen, one of the few other women pilots on the base. "Getting in is one thing. Getting out after you've alerted every air defense system in the area is another." Kozlov's slight smile held no warmth. "That's where timing becomes everything. The strike has to be perfectly coordinated to maximize confusion and minimize response time. You hit hard, hit fast, and you're gone before they can organize a proper response." Colonel Price consulted his notes again. The Pentagon's assessment suggests this mission requires a pilot with experience in extreme low-altitude operations. "Captain Kozlov, are you volunteering for this assignment?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a spent cartridge. Every person in the room understood the implications. This wasn't just a dangerous mission. It was the kind of assignment that could end careers or lives if it went wrong. Kozlov looked around the room, meeting the eyes of pilots who'd spent the morning questioning her presence. "Colonel, I've been flying missions like this for longer than I care to admit. If the Pentagon thinks I'm the right choice, then I'm ready to proceed." Her words carried the weight of someone who'd faced similar decisions before. But there was something else in her tone, a quiet intensity that suggested this mission meant more to her than just another assignment. Staff Sergeant Kelly, still standing by the door, looked like he was beginning to understand that he'd made a significant error in judgment. The woman he'd tried to turn away from the briefing was apparently the key to the entire operation. The briefing continued for another hour, with detailed discussions of weather patterns, enemy capabilities, and contingency plans. But the dynamic in the room had shifted completely. The pilots who'd initially viewed Kozlov with skepticism were now listening to her tactical assessments with the respect reserved for proven combat veterans. As the meeting concluded, Colonel Price approached Kozlov. "Captain, I'll need a full mission brief by 800 tomorrow. Can you be ready?" Kozlov nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll need access to the detailed terrain maps and current weather forecasting data." "Done. Major Santos will coordinate with you on the intelligence requirements." As the pilots filed out of the briefing room, Morrison approached Kozlov. "Captain, I owe you an apology. We get a lot of transfers through here and not all of them are. Well, not all of them are like you." Kozlov's expression softened slightly. "No apology necessary, Major. In this business, credibility is earned in the air, not in briefing rooms." But as she gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Kozlov caught sight of Staff Sergeant Kelly still standing by the door. Their eyes met for a moment, and she could see the embarrassment in his expression. "Sergeant," she said quietly as she passed him, "you were just doing your job. No harm done." Kelly nodded, but his face remained flushed with the realization of how badly he'd misjudged the situation. As Kozlov left the briefing room, he was already wondering what other assumptions he'd made that might prove equally wrong. The base's operations tempo increased immediately following the briefing. Within hours, maintenance crews were preparing aircraft for potential combat operations. Intelligence analysts were updating target assessments, and communications specialists were establishing secure channels for mission coordination. But in the pilot quarters, the conversation revolved around one central question. Who exactly was Captain Vera Kozlov, and why had the Pentagon specifically requested her for this mission? Captain Morrison sat in the common area, nursing a cup of coffee and reviewing the mission parameters. "I've been flying combat missions for 12 years," he said to the small group of pilots gathered around him. "I've never seen the Pentagon request a specific pilot for an operation like this." "Maybe she's special operations," suggested Captain Chen. "Some of those pilots have backgrounds we never hear about." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, an experienced Navy pilot on temporary assignment, shook her head. "I've worked with special operations pilots. They don't usually get transferred to regular fighter squadrons. There's something different about this." The speculation continued, but none of the pilots had access to the classified personnel files that would have answered their questions. What they didn't know was that Captain Kozlov's background included missions that had never been officially acknowledged, operations that had taken place in regions that didn't officially exist on any military maps. In her quarters, Kozlov was reviewing the mission parameters with the methodical attention of someone who'd learned that survival depended on understanding every variable. She'd flown similar missions before, but never in conditions quite like these. The target facility was located in a valley system that presented unique challenges. The approach would require flying through mountain passes at altitudes that left no margin for error. The weather conditions were deteriorating, with high winds and potential for sudden storms that could ground aircraft for days. But it was the extraction that concerned her most. Getting into the target area would be difficult but manageable. Getting out after alerting every air defense system in the region would require split-second timing and perfect execution. She'd done it before, but never under these exact conditions, and never with so much attention focused on her performance. Her secure communication device chimed with an incoming message. The sender was identified only as Pentagon Liaison, but Kozlov recognized the encryption signature. This was from someone with access to her complete service record. The message was brief. Mission parameters confirmed. Weather window closing rapidly. Recommend immediate preparation for 72-hour deployment. Your expertise is critical to operation success. Kozlov stared at the message for a long moment. She'd been expecting this assignment for weeks, ever since her transfer to Forward Operating Base Resolute. But seeing it confirmed in writing made it real in a way that briefings and speculation couldn't. She was about to undertake the most challenging mission of her career, in front of pilots who'd initially questioned her qualifications, for reasons that couldn't be fully explained to anyone without the highest security clearances. The irony wasn't lost on her. Staff Sergeant Kelly had tried to keep her out of the briefing because he didn't think she belonged there. By tomorrow, she might be the only pilot on the base capable of completing the mission that briefing had described. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the desert landscape surrounding Forward Operating Base Resolute. The mountains in the distance were silhouetted against the orange sky, their peaks shrouded in clouds that suggested deteriorating weather conditions. Kozlov had spent her career flying into situations that other pilots considered impossible. Tomorrow, she would find out if her reputation was justified, or if the Pentagon's confidence in her abilities had been misplaced. Either way, by this time tomorrow, everyone on the base would know exactly who Captain Vera Nightingale Kozlov really was. The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Resolute operated on military efficiency, serving meals to hundreds of personnel in shifts that maximized operational readiness. At 5:30 hours, the facility was nearly empty, except for early shift maintenance crews and pilots preparing for dawn reconnaissance missions. Captain Kozlov entered the mess hall carrying a tablet loaded with mission data and weather forecasts. She'd been awake since 400, reviewing target imagery, and calculating approach vectors for the mission that would launch in less than 18 hours. Her flight suit was perfectly pressed, her boots polished to regulation standard, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed the intensity of her preparation. She selected a table in the corner, away from the handful of other personnel scattered throughout the facility. Privacy was essential for reviewing classified materials, but more importantly, she needed space to think without interruption. The mission profile was unlike anything she'd encountered in her 14 years of military service. The target facility was located in a valley system that presented challenges that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with conventional aircraft. The approach required flying through mountain passes at altitudes that left no margin for error, in weather conditions that were deteriorating by the hour. But it was the political implications that added layers of complexity to an already dangerous mission. Intelligence reports suggested that the target facility was housing advanced surface-to-air missile systems that could threaten operations across the entire theater. The diplomatic consequences of failure would extend far beyond military considerations. As she studied the topographical data, Kozlov became aware of someone approaching her table. She looked up to see Staff Sergeant Kelly standing nearby, holding a cup of coffee and looking significantly more uncomfortable than he had during the previous day's briefing. "Captain, I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I was out of line." Kozlov gestured to the chair across from her. "Have a seat, Sergeant, and you weren't out of line. You were following security protocols." Kelly sat down, but his posture remained rigid. "Ma'am, I've been running security for these briefings for 8 months. I should have recognized your name from the transfer orders." "How could you recognize something you'd never seen before?" Kozlov asked, her tone matter-of-fact. "My transfer orders were classified above your clearance level. You couldn't have known who I was." The sergeant's relief was visible, but his curiosity remained. "Captain, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly is your background? The other pilots have been speculating, but nobody seems to know anything definitive." Kozlov considered her response carefully. The details of her service record were classified, but the basic facts were available to anyone with appropriate clearance. "I've been flying precision strikes in extreme terrain for most of my career. That's about all I can tell you without getting into classified material. But yesterday, when Colonel Price mentioned that the Pentagon had specifically requested you for this mission, that's above both our pay grades, Sergeant. What I can tell you is that I've flown missions in conditions similar to what we're facing today." Kelly nodded, but his expression suggested he was still processing the implications. The woman he'd tried to turn away from the briefing was apparently qualified for missions that required Pentagon-level approval. Captain Morrison entered the mess hall, spotted Kozlov, and approached their table. "Captain, I've been reviewing the mission parameters. The weather forecast shows deteriorating conditions throughout the target area." Kozlov consulted her tablet. "High winds, potential for sudden storms, and cloud cover that could drop to ground level without warning. It's not ideal, but it's manageable. For someone with your experience, maybe. But what about backup plans? If conditions deteriorate beyond acceptable limits, then we abort and wait for better weather. This mission is challenging, but it's not suicidal." Morrison's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Captain, I've been flying combat missions for 12 years. I've never seen weather conditions like these attempted for a precision strike." Kozlov met his eyes across the table. "Major, I've been flying in conditions like these for longer than I care to remember. Experience matters, but so does knowing when to walk away from an impossible situation." Her words carried the quiet authority of someone who'd faced similar decisions before. But there was something else in her tone, a suggestion that she'd learned to read dangerous situations through hard experience, not just training. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Major Santos, the intelligence officer from the previous day's briefing. She approached their table with the urgency of someone carrying time-sensitive information. Captain Kozlov, we've received updated intelligence on the target facility. The enemy is aware of our surveillance activities and is implementing countermeasures. Kozlov immediately focused on the tablet Santos handed her. The new intelligence showed additional air defense systems being moved into position around the target area, and thermal imaging suggested increased personnel activity within the facility itself. They're reinforcing their defenses, Morrison observed, studying the data over Kozlov's shoulder. This is going to make the mission significantly more challenging. Or significantly more important, Kozlov replied. If they're reinforcing the facility, it suggests the intelligence about advanced missile systems is accurate. That makes this mission even more critical. Santos nodded grimly. The Pentagon's assessment is that we have a narrow window of opportunity. If we don't neutralize this facility within the next 48 hours, the enemy will have time to fully implement their defensive improvements. The implications were clear to everyone at the table. The mission was already pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Additional enemy defenses would make it exponentially more dangerous. What about support aircraft? Morrison asked. Electronic warfare assets, air superiority fighters. Limited, Santos replied. The terrain makes it difficult to provide conventional support. The strike aircraft will be operating largely independently once they enter the target area. Kozlov studied the intelligence data with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read tactical situations quickly and accurately. The enemy's defensive improvements were significant, but they also revealed information about the facility's layout and operational priorities. The air defense systems they're deploying are designed to counter high-altitude threats, she observed. They're not optimized for aircraft operating at extremely low altitudes. Which supports your approach vector recommendations, Morrison said, beginning to understand the tactical implications. Exactly. The enemy is preparing for a conventional attack profile. If we can maintain the element of surprise and execute the strike before they can adjust their defensive posture, we still have a reasonable chance of success. Santos consulted her watch. The weather window is closing rapidly. If we're going to execute this mission, we need to launch within the next 12 hours. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just about completing a successful mission. It was about completing it before conditions made success impossible. Kozlov gathered her materials and stood. I need to review the updated intelligence and adjust the mission parameters accordingly. Major Morrison, I'll need your assistance with backup planning. As they prepared to leave the mess hall, Staff Sergeant Kelly remained seated, watching the woman he'd initially tried to turn away from the briefing. Yesterday, he'd questioned her qualifications. Today, he was watching her take command of a mission that would determine the success or failure of a critical operation. The irony wasn't lost on him. Sometimes the people you underestimate turn out to be exactly the ones you need most. The Flight Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Resolute hummed with activity as the mission launch time approached. Banks of computers displayed weather data, satellite imagery, and real-time intelligence updates. Radio communications crackled with traffic from aircraft across the theater, and the large display screens showed the positions of friendly and enemy forces throughout the region. Captain Kozlov stood at the central planning station, surrounded by maps, weather forecasts, and mission parameters. Her flight suit was equipped with specialized navigation equipment, and her helmet bore the distinctive markings of a pilot cleared for autonomous operations. But it was her expression that caught the attention of everyone in the operations center, the calm focus of someone who'd done this before. Colonel Price approached with the final mission authorization. Captain, the Pentagon has approved the mission profile. You're cleared for launch in 4 hours. Kozlov nodded, but her attention remained focused on the weather data streaming across her tablet. The conditions were deteriorating faster than predicted, with high winds and storm systems moving into the target area. Sir, I recommend moving the launch time forward by 2 hours. The weather window is closing rapidly. Price consulted with the meteorological officer, who confirmed Kozlov's assessment. The storm systems were intensifying, and the window for the mission was narrowing with each passing hour. Approved. Launch time is now 1400 hours. Can you be ready? Yes, sir. The aircraft is already prepped and the mission parameters are loaded. Major Morrison joined them at the planning station. Captain, I've been reviewing the backup extraction routes. If the primary plan fails, you'll have limited options for getting out of the target area. Kozlov studied the escape routes Morrison had identified. They were all challenging, requiring precise navigation through mountain passes in deteriorating weather conditions. But they were viable, assuming the aircraft remained operational and the pilot maintained the capability to execute complex maneuvers. The backup plans are solid, she agreed, but the key is ensuring they're not necessary. This mission succeeds or fails based on the initial strike and immediate extraction. The operations center's activity intensified as the launch time approached. Maintenance crews completed final preparations on Kozlov's aircraft, while communications specialists established secure channels for mission coordination. Intelligence analysts provided real-time updates on enemy movements and defensive preparations. But it was the atmosphere among the pilots that reflected the true significance of the mission. Word had spread throughout the base that Captain Kozlov was undertaking a mission that had been specifically requested by the Pentagon. The woman who'd been questioned and underestimated was now carrying the responsibility for a critical operation. Lieutenant Commander Walsh approached Kozlov as she completed her final equipment checks. Captain, I wanted to wish you luck. I've been flying combat missions for 8 years, and I've never seen mission parameters like these. Kozlov looked up from her checklist. Commander, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. This mission is challenging, but it's not impossible. Her words carried the confidence of someone who'd faced similar situations before. But there was something else in her tone, a suggestion that she understood the risks better than anyone else in the operations center. The secure communication system chimed with an incoming message from Pentagon Operations. Colonel Price read the message and immediately approached Kozlov. Captain, the Pentagon has authorized you to proceed with the mission despite the deteriorating weather conditions. They consider this operation critical to ongoing strategic objectives. The message was clear. The mission would proceed regardless of the challenges posed by weather and enemy defenses. The political and military implications were too significant to allow for delays. Kozlov nodded her understanding. Sir, I'm ready to proceed. The aircraft is fully prepared and the mission parameters are optimized for current conditions. As she spoke, the operations center's displays showed the storm systems moving into the target area. The weather conditions were pushing the boundaries of what was safe for aircraft operations, but they were still within the parameters that Kozlov had trained for throughout her career. Staff Sergeant Kelly approached with the final security clearance. Captain, you're cleared for departure. The runway is reserved for your exclusive use. It was a moment of recognition that would have been impossible 24 hours earlier. The sergeant who'd initially questioned her presence was now facilitating her departure on a mission that could determine the success or failure of strategic operations. Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate your professionalism. As Kozlov prepared to leave the operations center, she paused to look around at the faces of the personnel who'd been working to support the mission. Pilots, intelligence officers, maintenance crews, and communications specialists, all of them had contributed to making the mission possible. but it was Major Morrison who captured the moment most effectively. "Captain, we'll be monitoring your progress from here. The entire base is pulling for you." Kozlov's expression softened slightly. "Major, I've been flying missions like this for most of my career. Today won't be any different." But as she left the operations center and walked toward the flight line, everyone present understood that today would be very different indeed. The woman who'd been turned away from a briefing was now walking toward an aircraft that would carry her into one of the most challenging missions any of them had ever encountered. The question wasn't whether she was qualified for the mission. Her presence here had answered that question. The question was whether anyone, regardless of their qualifications, could succeed in the conditions they were facing. Within the hour, they would have their answer. The F-35 Lightning II sat on the tarmac like a predator waiting to strike. Its angular stealth design absorbed the harsh desert sunlight, creating shadows that seemed to bend around the aircraft's distinctive profile. Ground crews completed final preparations with the methodical precision that separated military aviation from civilian operations. Each technician focused on systems that would mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Captain Kozlov approached her aircraft with the measured pace of someone who'd learned to conserve energy for the challenges ahead. Her flight suit was equipped with survival gear optimized for the terrain she'd be flying over: mountain rescue equipment, cold weather gear, and emergency medical supplies that could sustain her for days if the mission went wrong. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the base's senior maintenance officer, met her at the aircraft. "Captain, she's ready to go. All systems are green, weapons are loaded, and fuel is topped off. You've got maximum range and full capability." Kozlov nodded, beginning her external inspection of the aircraft. Every surface, every system, every component would be scrutinized before she trusted her life to the machine. It was a ritual that had kept her alive through countless missions, and she wouldn't abandon it now. "Chief, what's the aircraft's service history? Any maintenance issues I should know about?" "This bird is one of our best, Captain. Fresh out of depot maintenance, all systems updated to the latest configuration. She's been flying combat missions for 3 years without a single abort." The inspection continued for 20 minutes, with Kozlov examining every aspect of the aircraft's external condition. The weapon systems were loaded with precision-guided munitions designed for the specific targets they'd identified in the intelligence briefings. The fuel systems were optimized for the extended range required to reach the target area and return safely. But it was the aircraft's stealth capabilities that would be most critical to mission success. The F-35's design allowed it to penetrate enemy airspace without being detected by conventional radar systems. In the mountain terrain they'd be flying through, that stealth capability would be the difference between success and disaster. As she completed the external inspection, Kozlov became aware of the gathering crowd of personnel watching from the flight line. Word had spread throughout the base that she was launching on a mission that had been specifically requested by the Pentagon. Pilots, maintenance crews, intelligence officers, and support personnel had gathered to witness the departure of someone who was carrying the hopes and expectations of the entire base. Major Morrison approached as she prepared to climb into the cockpit. "Captain, the weather conditions are continuing to deteriorate. Are you sure you want to proceed?" Kozlov paused on the aircraft's ladder, looking toward the mountains where storm clouds were building. The weather was challenging, but it was still within the parameters she'd trained for throughout her career. "Major, I've flown in worse conditions. The key is understanding that weather is just another variable to be managed, not a barrier to be feared." Her words carried the confidence of someone who'd learned to adapt to changing conditions through experience, not just training. But there was something else in her tone, a suggestion that she'd faced situations where weather had been the least of her concerns. The cockpit of the F-35 Lightning II was a marvel of modern technology. Digital displays provided real-time information about every aspect of the aircraft's performance, while advanced navigation systems calculated optimal flight paths through the challenging terrain ahead. The pilot's seat was designed for comfort during extended missions, but it was the aircraft's fusion of sensors and weapons systems that made it one of the most capable fighters in the world. Kozlov settled into the cockpit with the familiarity of someone who'd spent thousands of hours in similar aircraft. Every switch, every display, every control was positioned exactly where her training had taught her to expect. The aircraft became an extension of her own capabilities, amplifying her skills and experience into something greater than the sum of its parts. The engine startup sequence proceeded with mechanical precision. The F-35's Pratt & Whitney F-135 engine was one of the most powerful fighter engines ever built, capable of generating over 40,000 pounds of thrust. As the engine spooled up to idle power, the aircraft's systems came online with the smooth integration that marked advanced military technology. Resolute Tower, Nightingale requesting clearance for departure. The radio response came immediately. Nightingale, Resolute Tower, you are cleared for departure. Winds are gusting to 30 knots from the west. Recommend runway 36 for takeoff. Kozlov acknowledged the clearance and began taxiing toward the runway. The aircraft's weight was significant, over 70,000 pounds fully loaded with fuel and weapons. But the F-35's design allowed it to operate from relatively short runways, a capability that would be essential for the mission ahead. As she reached the runway threshold, Kozlov paused for a final check of all systems. Engine parameters were within normal ranges, weapons systems were armed and ready, and navigation equipment was locked onto the coordinates for the target area. The aircraft was as ready as technology and human expertise could make it. Resolute Tower, Nightingale ready for departure. Nightingale, you are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting. The phrase carried special meaning in military aviation. It was more than just a standard farewell. It was a recognition that the pilot was heading into danger and an expression of confidence that they would return safely. Kozlov advanced the throttle to full power. The F-35's engine responded with a roar that echoed across the desert landscape, and the aircraft began accelerating down the runway. At 150 knots, she rotated the nose upward, and the fighter lifted off into the afternoon sky. As the aircraft climbed away from forward operating base Resolute, Kozlov could see the terrain that lay ahead. The mountains rose to over 12,000 feet, their peaks shrouded in clouds that suggested the challenging weather conditions she'd be flying through. The target area was over 200 miles away, through some of the most difficult terrain in the region. But it was the significance of the mission that weighed most heavily on her mind. The intelligence reports suggested that the target facility housed advanced missile systems that could threaten operations across the entire theater. The political and military implications of success or failure extended far beyond the immediate tactical objectives. Resolute Control, Nightingale departing local area, proceeding to target area as briefed. Nightingale, Resolute Control, we have you on radar. You are cleared to proceed. Contact us on extraction. The radio communication was brief and professional, but everyone involved understood the implications. From this point forward, Captain Kozlov would be operating largely independently, relying on her own skills and judgment to navigate the challenges ahead. As the F-35 climbed toward its cruising altitude, Kozlov settled into the rhythm of long-distance flight. The aircraft systems provided constant updates on fuel consumption, weather conditions, and navigation progress. But it was the view outside the cockpit that captured her attention, the vast expanse of desert giving way to the jagged peaks of mountains that would challenge every aspect of her flying skills. The mission was officially underway. Within 2 hours, she would be flying through mountain passes at altitudes that left no margin for error, in weather conditions that were deteriorating by the minute, toward a target that was defended by some of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. But as the aircraft settled into its cruise profile, Kozlov felt the familiar calm that came from being in her element. This was what she'd trained for throughout her career, the moment when preparation met execution, when theory became reality. The F-35 Lightning II cruised at 35,000 feet, its stealth profile invisible to the radar systems scanning the airspace below. The aircraft's advanced sensors provided Captain Kozlov with a comprehensive picture of the battlefield ahead, enemy air defense positions, weather patterns, and terrain features that would influence every aspect of the mission. As she approached the initial descent point, Kozlov reviewed the mission parameters one final time. The target facility was located in a valley system approximately 40 miles ahead, protected by natural terrain features that created a fortress-like environment. The approach would require descending to altitudes below 500 feet, flying through mountain passes barely wide enough for the aircraft's wingspan. Nightingale, this is resolute control. We're showing weather deterioration in your target area. Recommend you evaluate conditions before proceeding with the attack. Kozlov consulted her weather display. The storm system was intensifying faster than predicted, with wind speeds approaching the limits of safe operation. Cloud cover was dropping toward ground level, and visibility was decreasing rapidly. Resolute control, Nightingale, I have the weather picture. Conditions are challenging but manageable, proceeding as planned. The radio fell silent. Everyone at Forward Operating Base Resolute understood that from this point forward, Captain Kozlov would be making decisions based on her own assessment of the situation. The weather conditions were pushing the boundaries of what was safe, but they were still within the parameters she'd trained for throughout her career. As the F-35 began its descent toward the target area, the character of the flight changed completely. The smooth cruise profile gave way to the precise maneuvering required for low-altitude operations. Every control input mattered. Every decision carried the potential for success or disaster. The mountains rose around the aircraft like the walls of a canyon, their peaks disappearing into the storm clouds above. The terrain was more challenging than the satellite imagery had suggested, jagged rock formations that created unpredictable wind patterns, narrow valleys that channeled air currents into dangerous turbulence. But it was the visual beauty of the landscape that struck Kozlov most forcefully. Despite the danger, despite the mission's urgency, she found herself momentarily captivated by the stark magnificence of the terrain. The mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, their ancient peaks bearing witness to conflicts that had raged across this region for centuries. The aircraft's radar warning receiver chimed softly, indicating the presence of enemy air defense systems. The signals were weak and intermittent, suggesting that the F-35's stealth capabilities were functioning as designed. But Kozlov understood that detection was always a possibility, especially at the low altitudes required for the mission. Nightingale, Resolute Control. We're tracking multiple air defense systems in your area. Recommend extreme caution. Resolute Control, Nightingale. I have the threat picture. Maintaining stealth profile and proceeding to target. The communication was brief and professional, but it carried the weight of shared understanding. Everyone involved in the mission knew that the enemy's air defense systems were designed to engage aircraft operating at conventional altitudes. The F-35's ability to operate below the radar horizon was its primary defense against those threats. As the aircraft descended to 1,000 feet above ground level, the flight characteristics changed dramatically. The air was thicker, creating more lift but also more turbulence. The mountains created wind shear that could tear apart a conventional approach, but they also provided concealment from enemy radar systems. Kozlov's hands moved across the aircraft's controls with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of low-altitude flight. Every adjustment was calculated to maintain the optimal balance between speed, altitude, and stealth. The margin for error was microscopic, but her training had prepared her for exactly these conditions. The target facility appeared on her sensors as a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by steep mountain walls. The intelligence reports had been accurate. The facility was heavily defended, with multiple air defense systems positioned to engage aircraft approaching from conventional vectors. But the valley's geography also created blind spots that could be exploited by an aircraft willing to fly at extremely low altitudes. Target acquired, beginning attack run. The words were transmitted automatically by the aircraft systems, but they carried the weight of 14 years of military service. This was the moment when all of her training, all of her experience, all of her preparation would be tested against the reality of combat operations. The F-35 descended to 200 feet above the valley floor, flying between mountain walls that rose thousands of feet on either side. The terrain was so close that individual rocks and trees were visible through the aircraft's canopy. The sensation was like flying through a canyon at nearly the speed of sound, with death waiting for any pilot who made a mistake. But it was the silence that struck Kozlov most powerfully. Despite the roar of the engine, despite the rush of wind over the aircraft's surfaces, there was a profound quiet in the cockpit. The kind of silence that comes from total focus, from the complete integration of human and machine in pursuit of a single objective. The target facility expanded in her sensors as the aircraft approached the attack point. The buildings were hardened structures designed to withstand conventional bombing attacks, but they were vulnerable to the precision-guided munitions the F-35 carried. The key was accurate target identification and precise weapons delivery in the seconds available before enemy air defenses could respond. Weapons armed, target locked, commencing attack. The first missile left the aircraft's internal bay with a sound like thunder in a confined space. The precision-guided munition flew toward its target with the accuracy that separated modern warfare from the area bombing of previous generations. Within seconds, it would strike the primary target building with enough force to penetrate the hardened structure and destroy the missile systems housed within. But it was the second missile that would test the limits of Kozlov's skill. The target required a direct hit on a specific section of the facility, and the approach vector was complicated by the terrain features surrounding the valley. The aircraft would need to maintain perfect position while delivering the weapon with surgical precision. Second missile away, direct hit on primary target. The explosions that followed were visible even through the storm clouds that shrouded the valley. The facility erupted in a series of secondary explosions that suggested the intelligence reports about advanced missile systems had been accurate. The target had been destroyed, but the mission was far from over. The enemy's air defense systems responded within seconds of the first explosion. Surface-to-air missiles launched from positions around the valley, their guidance systems searching for the aircraft that had delivered the devastating attack. But the F-35's stealth capabilities and extremely low altitude made it nearly impossible to track with conventional radar. Resolute Control Nightingale, target destroyed, beginning extraction. Nightingale Resolute Control, outstanding work. We're tracking multiple SAM launches in your area. Recommend immediate departure. The extraction phase would be even more challenging than the attack itself. The enemy now knew that an aircraft was operating in the area, and every air defense system in the region would be searching for the F-35. The flight path out of the valley would require flying through the same dangerous terrain that had concealed the approach, but now with the added threat of active enemy engagement. Kozlov banked the aircraft sharply to the left, following the predetermined extraction route through a mountain pass that would take her away from the heaviest concentration of air defense systems. The F-35 climbed rapidly, seeking the altitude and speed that would maximize its chances of survival. But it was the weather that presented the greatest challenge. The storm system had intensified during the attack, and visibility was now approaching zero. The mountain passes were shrouded in clouds that made visual navigation impossible, and the wind speeds were approaching the limits of safe operation. Resolute control, Nightingale. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Visibility is near zero and winds are gusting to 50 knots. Nightingale, we have you on radar. Recommend climbing to altitude and proceeding direct to base. The recommendation made tactical sense, but it also carried significant risk. Climbing to altitude would make the aircraft more vulnerable to enemy air defense systems, but remaining at low altitude in the deteriorating weather conditions could be equally dangerous. Kozlov made the decision that would define the rest of the mission. Instead of climbing to altitude, she would maintain low-level flight through the mountain passes, using the terrain to mask her escape from enemy radar systems. It was a calculated risk based on her assessment of the threats and her confidence in her own abilities. The F-35 flew through the storm with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel cutting through tissue. Every control input was designed to maintain the optimal balance between speed, altitude, and stealth. The weather conditions were pushing the boundaries of what was safe, but they were still within the parameters that Kozlov had trained for throughout her career. As she cleared the mountain passes and began the flight back to forward operating base Resolute, Kozlov allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The mission had been executed successfully, the target had been destroyed, and the aircraft was returning safely. But it was the personal significance of the achievement that mattered most. 24 hours earlier, Staff Sergeant Kelly had tried to keep her out of the mission briefing because he didn't think she belonged there. Today, she had completed a mission that few pilots would have attempted, in conditions that pushed the limits of both aircraft and human capability. The flight back to base proceeded without incident, but the weather conditions continued to deteriorate. By the time Kozlov reached the initial approach point for forward operating base Resolute, the storm had expanded to cover the entire region. Landing would require instrument precision in visibility conditions that challenged even the most experienced pilots. Resolute Tower, Nightingale requesting approach clearance. Mission complete. Nightingale, Resolute Tower, we've been monitoring your progress. Outstanding work. You're cleared for approach. Winds are gusting to 40 knots. Visibility is 2 miles in blowing sand. The approach to forward operating base Resolute was routine compared to the challenges of the mission itself, but it required the same precision and attention to detail that had characterized every aspect of the flight. The F-35 touched down on the runway with the smooth contact that marked a professional landing, and Kozlov taxied clear of the active runway. As she shut down the engine and completed the post-flight checklist, Kozlov could see the gathering crowd of personnel waiting on the flight line. Word had spread throughout the base that the mission had been successful, and pilots, maintenance crews, intelligence officers, and support personnel had gathered to welcome her return. Colonel Price approached the aircraft as she climbed down from the cockpit. "Captain, preliminary reports suggest the mission was a complete success. The target facility has been destroyed, and there are no indications of surviving missile systems." Kozlov nodded, but her attention was focused on the implications of the mission's success. The intelligence reports about advanced missile systems had been accurate, and the threat to operations across the theater had been eliminated. But it was the personal achievement that mattered most, the proof that her reputation and capabilities were justified. Major Morrison joined them on the flight line. "Captain, I owe you an apology. I questioned whether this mission was possible, and you've proven that it was not only possible but achievable with the right pilot and the right approach." The words carried the weight of professional recognition. Morrison had been skeptical of the mission parameters, but he'd been impressed by Kozlov's tactical planning and execution. The successful completion of the mission had demonstrated that experience and expertise could overcome even the most challenging obstacles. But it was Staff Sergeant Kelly's presence that completed the circle of recognition. The sergeant who'd initially tried to keep her out of the briefing was now part of the group welcoming her return from a successful mission. "Captain, I wanted to thank you for your professionalism yesterday. I learned something important about making assumptions based on incomplete information." Kozlov's expression softened slightly. "Sergeant, we all make assumptions. The key is learning from them and applying those lessons to future situations." As the crowd dispersed and the aircraft was towed to the maintenance hangar, Kozlov reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. The mission had been successful, but it was the personal journey that mattered most. She'd proven that her reputation was justified, that her capabilities were real, and that expertise could overcome even the most challenging obstacles. The storm that had complicated the mission was beginning to clear, and the sun was setting over the desert landscape surrounding Forward Operating Base Resolute. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to apply the lessons learned from today's operation. But tonight, Captain Vera Nightingale Kozlov could rest in the knowledge that she'd completed one of the most challenging missions of her career, in conditions that few pilots would have attempted, with results that would influence strategic operations across the theater. The woman who'd been turned away from a briefing had become the pilot who'd made that briefing's objectives achievable. The intelligence debrief lasted 3 hours, with every aspect of the mission analyzed and documented for future reference. Captain Kozlov sat in the secure briefing room, reviewing gun camera footage and sensor data, while intelligence officers asked detailed questions about enemy defensive capabilities, weather conditions, and tactical observations. Major Santos led the debriefing, her questions precise and focused on extracting maximum intelligence value from the mission. "Captain, the enemy's air defense systems responded faster than our models predicted. What was your assessment of their capabilities?" Kozlov consulted her notes, reviewing the sequence of events that had followed the initial attack. The SAM systems were positioned to engage aircraft approaching from conventional vectors, but they weren't optimized for extremely low-altitude threats. Their response time was quick, but their accuracy was limited by the terrain masking. "Did you observe any capabilities that weren't included in the pre-mission intelligence?" "They had more mobile systems than we anticipated. I counted at least 3 SAM sites that weren't in the original target assessment, but their positioning suggested they were designed to counter high-altitude threats, not low-level penetration." The questioning continued, with intelligence officers documenting every detail that could inform future operations. The mission had been successful, but it had also provided valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities and defensive strategies. Colonel Price entered the briefing room carrying a secure communication device. "Captain, the Pentagon wants to speak with you directly. They're requesting a real-time debrief of the mission." Kozlov nodded, understanding the significance of the request. Direct communication with Pentagon officials was reserved for missions of the highest importance, and the successful completion of this operation had clearly attracted attention at the highest levels of the military hierarchy. The secure communication link connected her directly to a conference room at the Pentagon, where senior military officials were gathered to receive her first-hand account of the mission. The conversation was brief but intense, with questions that demonstrated the strategic importance of the intelligence she'd gathered. "Captain Kozlov, this is General Harrison. Your mission has provided critical intelligence about enemy capabilities in the region. The successful destruction of the missile facility eliminates a significant threat to our operations." "Thank you, sir. The mission was challenging, but the intelligence preparation was excellent. The target assessment was accurate, and the tactical approach was sound." Captain, we're forwarding your tactical recommendations to other units operating in similar terrain. Your methods may be applicable to future operations requiring precision strikes in extreme environments. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Pentagon officials asking detailed questions about every aspect of the mission. But it was the concluding comment that carried the most significance. Captain, the President has been briefed on your mission. He wanted me to convey his personal thanks for your service and your exceptional performance under challenging conditions. As the communication ended, Kozlov sat quietly for a moment, processing the implications of what she'd just heard. The mission had been successful enough to warrant presidential attention, and her tactical approach was being studied for application to future operations. But it was the personal journey that mattered most. 24 hours earlier, she'd been an unknown transfer pilot whose qualifications were questioned by personnel who'd never heard of her. Today, she was receiving direct communication from Pentagon officials and presidential recognition for her performance. Major Morrison entered the briefing room as she completed her notes. Captain, I wanted to discuss your tactical approach. The low-altitude penetration through those mountain passes was unlike anything I've seen in my career. Kozlov looked up from her paperwork. Major, every tactical situation is unique. The key is adapting your approach to the specific conditions you're facing, not trying to force a standard solution onto a non-standard problem. But the risk factors, flying at those altitudes in those weather conditions with that terrain. Risk is relative. The conventional approach would have been detected by their air defense systems long before we reached the target. The low-altitude approach carried different risks, but it also provided advantages that made mission success possible. Morrison studied the mission data displayed on the briefing room screens. Captain, I've been flying combat missions for 12 years. I've never seen anyone execute a mission profile like that. Major, I've been flying missions like this for most of my career. Experience matters, but so does understanding that every situation requires a tailored approach. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Commander Walsh, who'd been monitoring the mission from the operations center. Captain, I wanted to congratulate you on the mission success. The tactical execution was flawless. Thank you, Commander, but success depends on more than just the pilot. The intelligence preparation, the maintenance support, the mission planning, all of those factors contributed to the outcome. Walsh nodded, but her expression suggested she understood the individual achievement involved. Captain, I've been flying for 8 years, and I've never seen weather conditions like those attempted for a precision strike mission. Weather is just another variable to be managed. The key is understanding how environmental conditions affect aircraft performance and adjusting your approach accordingly. As the formal debriefing concluded, Kozlov gathered her materials and prepared to leave the briefing room. The mission was complete, the intelligence had been gathered, and the tactical lessons had been documented. But it was the personal transformation that would have the most lasting impact. She walked through the corridors of Forward Operating Base Resolute, past personnel who nodded with the respect reserved for pilots who'd completed exceptional missions. The base's atmosphere had changed subtly. The woman who'd been questioned and underestimated was now recognized as someone who'd achieved something remarkable. In the pilot quarters, she found a message waiting on her secure communication device. The sender was identified as Pentagon Liaison, but the content was personal rather than official. Captain Kozlov, your mission has exceeded all expectations. The tactical innovations you demonstrated will influence operations across multiple theaters. Your reputation is well-deserved. The message continued with technical details about follow-up missions and strategic implications, but it was the personal recognition that mattered most. Her expertise had been validated not just by successful mission completion, but by the acknowledgement that her approach had contributed something valuable to military operations. As she prepared for sleep, Kozlov reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. The mission had been successful, but it was the personal journey that would remain with her. She'd proven that expertise and experience could overcome even the most challenging obstacles, and that reputation was earned through performance under pressure. The storm that had complicated the mission was clearing, and the stars were visible through her window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to apply the lessons learned from today's operation. But tonight, she could rest in the knowledge that she'd completed one of the most significant missions of her career, in conditions that few pilots would have attempted, with results that would influence strategic operations for years to come. The woman who'd been turned away from a briefing had become the pilot whose tactical innovations would be studied and applied throughout the military. Staff Sergeant Kelly's morning routine had been the same for 8 months at Forward Operating Base Resolute. He arrived at the operations center at 500 hours, reviewed the overnight intelligence summaries, and prepared for the day's briefings and security protocols. But this morning was different. The successful completion of Captain Kozlov's mission had changed the atmosphere throughout the base. As he reviewed the mission reports, Kelly found himself thinking about the woman he'd tried to turn away from the briefing 2 days earlier. The official documentation made it clear that her mission had been one of the most challenging operations attempted from the base, executed in conditions that pushed the limits of both aircraft and pilot capability. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd questioned her presence at the briefing because he didn't recognize her name on his roster. Today, her name was being forwarded to Pentagon officials as an example of exceptional performance under extreme conditions. Major Morrison approached his desk, carrying a secure communication device. "Sergeant, I need you to coordinate with Pentagon operations. They're requesting detailed mission documentation for Captain Kozlov's operation." Kelly nodded, understanding the significance of the request. Pentagon interest in specific missions was reserved for operations of the highest importance, and the attention focused on Kozlov's mission indicated its strategic value. "Sir, I've been reviewing the mission reports. The tactical approach she used was unlike anything I've seen documented." Morrison consulted his notes. "Sergeant, Captain Kozlov has been flying missions like this for most of her career. What we witnessed was the application of specialized expertise to a challenging tactical situation. But sir, the conditions she flew in, the weather, the terrain, the enemy defenses, all factors that she'd trained for and experienced before. The key was recognizing that this mission required someone with her specific qualifications." As they spoke, Captain Kozlov entered the operations center, carrying mission documentation for forwarding to higher headquarters. Her appearance was professional and composed, but there was a subtle change in her bearing, the confidence that came from having proven herself under the most challenging circumstances. "Sergeant Kelly, I need to forward these mission reports to Pentagon operations. Can you coordinate the secure transmission?" "Yes, ma'am. I'll handle the transmission immediately." As Kelly prepared the secure communication link, he found himself wanting to address the events of 2 days earlier. The woman he'd tried to exclude from the briefing had completed a mission that few pilots would have attempted. "Captain, I wanted to apologize again for Tuesday morning. I should have recognized." Kozlov interrupted him with a slight smile. "Sergeant, you were following established procedures. There's no need for continued apologies." "But ma'am, the mission you completed, I realize now that I was completely wrong about." "Sergeant, we all make judgments based on incomplete information. The key is learning from those experiences and applying the lessons to future situations." Her words carried the authority of someone who'd learned to read people and situations through extensive experience. But there was also a gentleness in her tone that suggested she understood the learning process that everyone went through. Major Morrison joined their conversation. "Captain, the Pentagon has requested that you remain available for consultation on similar missions. They're interested in applying your tactical approach to other operations." Kozlov nodded, understanding the implications. "Major, I'm available for whatever assignments are deemed appropriate. This type of mission requires specialized preparation, but the techniques are transferable to similar situations. The Pentagon is also interested in your assessment of enemy capabilities. The intelligence you gathered during the mission has strategic implications." As they discussed the mission's broader implications, Staff Sergeant Kelly found himself listening to a conversation that revealed the true scope of what Kozlov had accomplished. The mission hadn't just been successful. It had provided intelligence and tactical innovations that would influence operations across the theater. Colonel Price entered the operations center, carrying official notification of mission commendations. "Captain Kozlov, the Pentagon has approved the Distinguished Flying Cross for your performance during yesterday's mission. The recommendation cites exceptional skill and courage under extreme conditions." The announcement drew the attention of everyone in the operations center. The Distinguished Flying Cross was one of the military's highest awards for aerial achievement, reserved for actions that demonstrated extraordinary skill and bravery in combat situations. "Thank you, sir. The mission was successful because of the support provided by the entire team. The intelligence preparation, maintenance support, and mission planning all contributed to the outcome." Price nodded, but his expression made it clear that he understood the individual achievement involved. "Captain, the mission you completed will be studied and referenced for years to come. Your tactical approach has contributed something valuable to military aviation." As the formal recognition concluded, Kozlov prepared to leave the operations center, but Staff Sergeant Kelly approached her one final time. "Captain, I wanted to thank you for your professionalism throughout this process. I learned something important about making assumptions based on incomplete information." "Sergeant, everyone makes assumptions. The key is recognizing when those assumptions are wrong and adjusting accordingly." Her words carried the weight of someone who'd faced similar situations throughout her career. But there was also an understanding in her tone that suggested she recognized the learning process that everyone went through. As Kozlov left the operations center, Kelly reflected on the events of the past 3 days. The woman he'd tried to turn away from a briefing had completed one of the most challenging missions in the base's history, earned Pentagon recognition, and been awarded one of the military's highest honors for aerial achievement. The lesson was clear. Expertise and capability weren't always immediately apparent, and making judgments based on incomplete information could lead to significant errors. The woman he'd underestimated had proven to be exactly the person needed for an impossible mission. But it was the personal growth that mattered most. Kelly had learned to look beyond surface appearances and recognize that true capability often came in unexpected forms. The experience would influence his approach to security protocols and personnel assessment for the rest of his career. 2 weeks later, the operations tempo at Forward Operating Base Resolute had returned to normal, but the impact of Captain Kozlov's mission continued to resonate throughout the base. Intelligence reports confirmed that the destroyed missile facility had been housing advanced systems that posed a significant threat to regional operations, and the tactical approach she demonstrated was being incorporated into training programs across the military. Staff Sergeant Kelly had been promoted to Technical Sergeant, with his performance during the mission cited as evidence of his ability to adapt to changing situations and support critical operations. The promotion ceremony was brief, but Colonel Price's comments made it clear that the learning experience had been recognized and valued. "Technical Sergeant Kelly, your ability to recognize and correct errors in judgment demonstrates the kind of adaptability we need in our security personnel. Your performance during Captain Kozlov's mission exemplifies the professionalism we expect from our senior enlisted personnel. As the ceremony concluded, Kelly found himself thinking about the woman who taught him one of the most important lessons of his career. Captain Kozlov had been reassigned to a special operations unit, where her expertise in extreme terrain operations would be applied to missions that couldn't be discussed in unclassified settings. But her impact on Forward Operating Base Resolute would be lasting. The mission she'd completed had become a case study in tactical innovation, and her approach to the impossible had influenced the way the base's personnel thought about challenging operations. Major Morrison, now the base's deputy operations officer, had incorporated Kozlov's tactical principles into the training program for new pilots. Her mission demonstrated that conventional approaches don't always apply to unconventional problems. Sometimes you need to think beyond established procedures and develop solutions that match the specific conditions you're facing. The lesson had broader implications than just tactical planning. It applied to personnel assessment, mission preparation, and the recognition that capability often came in unexpected forms. The woman who'd been questioned and underestimated had proven that expertise and experience could overcome even the most challenging obstacles. Lieutenant Commander Walsh, who'd witnessed the mission from the operations center, had been selected for promotion to commander and assignment to a position where she could apply the lessons learned from observing Kozlov's approach to impossible missions. Captain Kozlov's mission taught me that success depends on more than just following established procedures. Sometimes you need to innovate, to develop new approaches that match the specific challenges you're facing. As the weeks passed, the story of Captain Kozlov's mission became part of the base's collective memory. New personnel arriving at Forward Operating Base Resolute heard the story during their orientation briefings, and it became a reminder that capability and expertise weren't always immediately apparent. But it was the personal impact that mattered most. Technical Sergeant Kelly had learned to look beyond surface appearances and recognize that true capability often came in unexpected forms. The experience had influenced his approach to security protocols and personnel assessment, and it would continue to shape his career for years to come. The woman who'd been turned away from a briefing had become a legend, a reminder that expertise and determination could overcome even the most challenging obstacles. Her mission had succeeded not just because of her individual capabilities, but because she demonstrated that innovation and adaptability were more valuable than conformity to established procedures. As the sun set over the desert landscape surrounding Forward Operating Base Resolute, Technical Sergeant Kelly reflected on the lessons learned from his encounter with Captain Vera Nightingale Kozlov. The experience had taught him that making assumptions based on incomplete information could lead to significant errors, and that true capability often came in unexpected forms. But most importantly, it had taught him that respect was earned through performance under pressure, not through conformity to expectations. The woman he'd initially underestimated had proven to be exactly the person needed for an impossible mission, and her success had influenced the way he approached his responsibilities for the rest of his career. The mission was complete, the lessons had been learned, and the impact would be lasting. Captain Kozlov's tactical innovations would be studied and applied for years to come, and her approach to the impossible would continue to influence military operations across the theater. But perhaps most importantly, her story would serve as a reminder that expertise and capability weren't always immediately apparent, and that making judgments based on incomplete information could lead to missing the very people who were most capable of achieving the impossible. The woman who'd been turned away from a briefing had become the pilot whose name would be remembered long after the details of her mission had been classified beyond recognition. Her legacy would live on in the tactical innovations she demonstrated, the lessons she taught, and the reminder that true capability often came in unexpected forms. In the years that followed, whenever new personnel arrived at Forward Operating Base Resolute, they would hear the story of Captain Vera Nightingale Kozlov, the woman who'd been questioned and underestimated, who'd proven that expertise and determination could overcome even the most challenging obstacles, and who demonstrated that innovation and adaptability were more valuable than conformity to established procedures. Her mission had succeeded not just because of her individual capabilities, but because she'd shown that the impossible was often just a matter of finding the right approach, the right person, and the right moment to prove that assumptions could be wrong and that true capability often came in the most unexpected forms. The briefing room that had initially excluded her now bore a plaque commemorating her mission, a reminder to all who entered that capability and expertise weren't always immediately apparent, and that respect was earned through performance under pressure rather than conformity to expectations. Staff Sergeant Kelly's name wasn't on that plaque, but his story was intertwined with Captain Kozlov's in ways that would influence his career for decades to come. The woman he'd tried to turn away from a briefing had taught him one of the most important lessons of his life, that making assumptions based on incomplete information could lead to missing the very people who were most capable of achieving the impossible. And in the end, that was the most valuable lesson of all.